reunited, and it feels so good. I want to sing it, but I'm not sure what our licensing rights are, so I'll just tell you, Frank Schwab, Jason Fitz, it wasn't the same without you last week, Frank. I feel like maybe next time you take a vacation, I should be allowed to go along so we can sit on the beach and pod together at an all-inclusive where there's unlimited alcohol. What could go wrong?
What could possibly go wrong? A lot of drinking a shot. And yes, it's funny because it's nice to take time off, get recharged and all that, but I love the NFL, man. I love what I do for a living. So it feels like I was missing out, all the Justin Jefferson news and all that. So it's good to be back, and kind of now starts, for me, it starts to ramp up to the season because I got these team previews coming out that I talk a lot about. June 18th, the first one comes out, and we'll be talking about each team this week. And I'm just excited. This is about the time of year where I really, really start to get the itch for the NFL to come back.
Yeah, this feels like the time of year where the sadness seeps in, right? Like, I would love to tell everybody in the world that I love the NBA so much that I'm interested in the Celtics-Mavs final. I'm casually interested in it. Like, I'm casually interested in what's happening with the W. It doesn't look like the Stanley Cup final is going to give us much of a final so far. So now we're sort of getting to that part of the year where, thank God, we have the Olympics at least coming up, which, by the way, Yahoo's going to cover better than anybody. Check us out. Got some great Olympians we just added to the roster. So, all of that is great. But, if we're being honest, Frank, this is the time where, you start to get the itch, right? This is the time where, suddenly you get twitchy on Sundays. You don't know what the hell to do with your day. You're reading every single writer. Even the guys that I read all the time that cover just teams are basically doing nothing right now. So everybody's recharging, which I respect. I like the recharge myself. But, my God, I am just ready for us to all overreact to something at training camp. One football hits the ground, whole world going to go apoplectic. I need that in my life.
Yeah, even today, NFL Network released its schedule of preseason games that they're going to televise live. And, I'm not a preseason guy. I cover it. I cover it with enthusiasm because I know a lot of people are into it. But even I was sitting there looking at the schedule we get to see Caleb Williams against, we get to see Drake May against. And it was kind of exciting, yeah. And I'm into the NBA and NHL. I love other sports, you know that. And I'm still I think this season more than ever, just because I really, truly think this season is going to be fun, exciting. And maybe it's all the rookie quarterbacks, maybe it's the Chiefs three-peat thing, but I'm really, really excited for this season. I just think there's a ton of good storylines.
Yeah, between the NFL and, I do a lot of work in college football, have my whole career. But this year in college football is going to be unprecedented with the playoff expansion. It just feels like football is going to feed my soul. We just have to wait to get there. So here's what we're going to do. We're doing 2 pods this week. Not one, we're getting 2. So you're getting Frank and Fitz for twice the fun. We're going to make that a real word. And the reason we're doing it this way is because what we thought we would do is today we're going to break down the AFC. Thursday we'll break down the NFC. Our goal is to give you one question that we have for each team. Frank mentioned he's doing previews. We're calling it one big thing, but it doesn't necessarily have to be the same big thing that everybody's been talking about all year. It could be like a question we're not thinking enough about. We're going to find one interesting question, which doesn't sound nearly as salacious as a podcast title, but one interesting question that we have on each team. So we'll alternate teams. We'll go through, and we're going to go in reverse order from last year's finish. So we're going to start with the suckiest team, and we're going to end with the best of the best. And that, for anybody that doesn't remember in the AFC, means we're going to start, I can't believe this, with the Patriots. We will end with the Chiefs, and we will hit everybody in between. Today's goal, the AFC. We're going to talk through it. Frank, are you ready for this gauntlet? Have you sufficiently hydrated? Do you have enough food in your... Are you ready? This is going to be 16 teams we're about to power blast through. You feel good?
Yeah, unlike you, I'm caffeined up, so I'm ready. I'm ready to rock. Yes, and trust me, I've been studying these teams for weeks for these previews. So yes, already.
You're right. By the way, if you guys have listened a lot to me, everybody knows that I drink a ton of caffeine. On May 15th, I went on this weird, wild diet where I'm eating exactly what a guy regimented for me at specific times every day, includes no caffeine. Here I am, a month later, still the Energizer Bunny, and it's all on water. So, au natural, people. All right, let's start with the New England Patriots. Give me your one big thing for New England that's on your mind right now.
Well, my one big thing for the Patriots this season is, can they avoid being the worst team in the NFL? And I hate to start that negatively, but when you look at this roster and all they're dealing with, there's a real good chance this team is picking first in next year's NFL draft. You think about the lack of talent they have, and you're not just going to replenish that in one draft. And they had to go get that franchise quarterback, which meant they couldn't trade down and add picks to bolster other positions. This is still a very talent poor roster. They mostly kind of struck out in free agency. And also, Jared Mayo is replacing a legend in Bill Belichick. Look, we could talk all we want about Bill Belichick and the problems he had in his last few years, but I still believe, X's and O's wise, on a game-to-game basis, Bill Belichick still had his fastball. He just didn't have any talent. Bill Belichick, the GM, really screwed up Bill Belichick, the coach. But going from that level of coaching to Jared Mayo, a rookie head coach, I just wonder if this is going to be the worst team in the NFL. Not a great spot to start for the New England Patriots, but I think if they could just not be the worst team in the NFL, show some signs of progress, I don't think that's the worst outcome for the New England Patriots this year.
One of the pillars I die on is benefit of the doubt in the offseason. And you get benefit of the doubt when people trust your coach and when people trust your quarterback. I would argue that if you took the logo off the side of the helmet and the expectations for the Patriots we've had for a generation and just threw it away, right now, as much as I love Drake May coming out of college, I think he could be great. You have a rookie quarterback that we don't know, and you have a rookie head coach that we don't know. If you put this same tandem together at almost any other team on a team that picked as high as they did this year in the draft, the presumption would be that they're going to stink. I think the Patriots are in a new era of football where they're going to have to get as used to losing as they were to winning for an entire era. Because until you've proven that you have Brady Belichick part 2, it is pointless to even give them that level of benefit of the doubt. I am out on the Patriots this year. I am out on the Patriots moving forward until there is something to believe in. And right now, Frank, to me, there's nothing.
Yeah. Do they get the first pick? Yes or no?
Yeah. I think the Patriots get the first pick.
I don't know. I'll say this. They're not number 32 in my countdown, but the more I look at it, the more I'm like, this really could be the team picking first in April.
All right, so let's go to a more positive team coming up next, at least in the eyes of many, the Chargers. Now, I have the Chargers here, and you've heard me say on Zero Blitz many times, I think long-term the Chargers are going to be fine. I believe that when landmark head coaches come in, the first thing they do is sell everybody the same bill. And I don't care if we're talking about John Gruden. I don't care if we're talking about Sean Payton. I don't care if we're talking about, Joe Gibbs back in the day with Washington. Like when legendary coaches come back in, what do they say? They immediately say, we're going to compete right away. Then after 1 year, they tell you, well, we didn't have the right guys in the building. We had to rip it apart. You take it down to the stubs, you rebuild it. That's where I think the Chargers are going to go. So the most interesting question to me is, what does this Herbert-Harbaugh marriage look like? If they were a celebrity couple, we'll call them Harbert. Either way, what did they look like together? Because Harbaugh loves to run the football, and Herbert is one of the best quarterbacks supposedly in the NFL. So, J.J. McCarthy, according to Harbaugh, was one of the best quarterbacks he'd ever seen in college football. He didn't throw the ball a lot. So are we about to see a different version of Justin Herbert, and our fans and the media going to be accepting of that when Herbert is a darling, and that may not be the type of offense that Harbaugh wants to run?
I'm really fascinated by this because you look at, if you're most coaches, you step in and you say, what's the one asset I have? It's Justin Herbert. I don't think Harbaugh thinks that way. I think he has a philosophy, and I think he wants to really establish the Chargers as a tough running team. That's always kind of been his MO his whole career. So I don't see him changing that. But I also will say this. Don Shula may be the greatest coach of all time, at least in conversation, right? He was part of those teams in the 70s that passed the ball only when they had to pass the ball. I think in Super Bowl VII, Bob Greasy attempted like 6 passes or something like that. He also coached Dan Marino, who was the NFL's first 5,000-yard quarterback. I think he evolved with the times and said, I got Dan Marino. I'm not going to have him handing off 30 times a game. I don't know if Harbaugh is going to do that with Justin Herbert when he really gets into the relationship with him, coaching him, sees, whoa, this guy has some special talent. I'm not just going to hand the ball off to Gus Edwards 25 times a game. I need to feature this guy and feature him prominently. I think this whole dance is going to be very interesting to see. How much does Harbaugh change his philosophy to fit Herbert? And do you feel like if he doesn't change his philosophy, are you just wasting Justin Herbert, who's making, $53 million a year? Something in that range? It's going to be fascinating because we know what Jim Harbaugh wants to do, but we also know what the strength of the Los Angeles Chargers is at this point.
Are the Chargers a playoff team this year?
No, not to me. I'm very low on the Chargers. I think you are too. I just think it takes a year. I just think their talent is overrated, including Herbert, maybe. And I just don't think that they're ready. Yes, Harbaugh went 13-3 his first year with the 49ers, but the 49ers were really, really loaded, and I don't see this Chargers team being the same.
Yeah, the 49ers weren't taking on Mahomes. Okay, so Frank, you're next up. By the way, I agree with you on that totally. Frank, you're next up with a team. When we started this show, we had some heated debates on the Tennessee Titans. I was all in on the Titans last year. I'm a moron. Frank, what is your question now for the Titans?
I think it's obvious with the Titans. The one big thing for the Titans this year is, can Will Levis be their franchise quarterback? And I think the term franchise quarterback gets overused sometimes. To many, it means like some MVP type of guy. Whereas I'm just talking about, can he be the guy who just is the answer for a decade? Whether he's the 15th best quarterback in the NFL or even better than that, can they just go into every single offseason saying, well, we don't need to worry about quarterback. We have Will Levis. He's at least good enough to win with if we build a good team around him. I just don't know with Will Levis. He was really good at times last year. I mean, you look back, his first game, throws 4 touchdowns against the Falcons. The comeback against the Dolphins, I thought he was excellent in that game. Also had a good game against Jacksonville in a loss. But in the other games, he wasn't that good. He needs to find some consistency with this. Can we see that 4 touchdown against Atlanta, Will Levis most of the season? Maybe. He was a guy who, remember, it was kind of ridiculous, but people were saying maybe this is the first pick of the draft. I do think he has that physical talent. I think he has that Josh Allen-esque qualities to his game, but I think the Titans need to figure out sooner rather than later, is this a guy who we just check that box every year? Okay, it's 2032. Will Levis is our franchise quarterback. We don't need to worry about that. Or are they fishing in these waters again next year? Because if Will Levis stinks, they're probably going to be drafting in the top 5 next year.
Well, and they'll be drafting a quarterback at that point, right? Like, because this is not Callahan's quarterback. And new head coach, that comes from Cincinnati, that understands what a great quarterback looks like. This is not Joe Burrow. This is not the quarterback he drafted either. So I think it's a very fair question, of where they should stand on this. And what's interesting to me, I'll go back to what a couple of people that covered him closely in college told me, that in college he had a hard time letting go of his mistakes. So he would throw an interception in the first quarter and in the fourth quarter still be thinking about it. And he's the sort of guy that really needs to be built up by the coaching staff. He needs to be sort of insulated and managed by the coaching staff in a way that he can handle those emotions, because he can be hard. He can be hard on himself in a way that is actually detrimental to his play. That sticks to me because he's on a team that's going to need him to take some chances, which means he's going to throw some picks. He's got some good weapons around him. Can they, as a coaching staff, get the best around him? I really think that one of the hardest teams to figure out this offseason are the Titans, because they've done the right things around Will Levis. I just don't know what to expect from Will Levis. And to be fair to what I said about the Patriots earlier, I don't know what to expect from Callahan as a first-time head coach. So I think the Titans are in a bit of a transition. I wouldn't be stunned to see the Titans suddenly find themselves right around 500. I wouldn't be stunned to see the Titans with 5 wins. I know it feels like that's a cop-out, but I just don't know what to expect from this team. So I think you're 1,000% right.
Yeah, let me ask you just straight out. In 5 years, is Will Levis the starting quarterback of the Titans? Because I'll say, I kind of think he is. I'm a little bit in on him. I like the talent.
I think yes, but I think he's the starting quarterback kind of like a Ryan Tannehill. He's not breaking the bank. Mm-hmm. He's not an epic guy. One interesting note we need to keep in mind, he was a second-round draft pick, which means they don't have the 5th year on him. So as he enters year 2, the clock ticks a little differently, because they'll have to make decisions on Will Levis more quickly than a lot of teams do on their franchise quarterback because of the second-round pick. 5 years, you think is he their starter? Is he the man?
I do, yeah. I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt and think that they've put enough talent around him where he can be, like you said, a Ryan Tannehill type franchise quarterback, where you're not necessarily, Patrick Mahomes, but you're also not for a few years there, Tannehill was clearly their guy, and I think Levis can kind of be that guy for the Titans going forward.
Speaking of things that we're not necessarily 100% in on, I get the next team, and we're gonna have to have like a whole segment this fall called Hammer the Under. There's just certain teams right now that I'm willing to hammer the under on. The New York Jets are one of them. And to me, the biggest question on the Jets is all about how are they going to handle the drama. And I say that, Frank, because everything that happens with the Jets results in drama, which includes the news we get today that Aaron Rodgers not at minicamp. And look, nobody right now as we speak, I don't know the reason why he's not at minicamp, but here's the bigger question to me. It's not just about Aaron Rodgers not being there. It's about the questions that now everybody has to answer. Robert Saleh is going to have to answer questions about it. If there's a couple of games where the offense struggles, the defense is again going to have to answer questions about it. When's the last time the Jets as an organization weren't in chaos? And when's the last time the Jets as an organization handled chaos particularly well? I don't believe that Aaron Rodgers is the type of quarterback that's going to stop outside noise from getting inside the building. And if that's the case, I got to trust the organization to handle that. I have no reason to trust it. And to me, that's the biggest question.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I mean, the line you said there that kind of resonated was, when's the last time the Jets dealt with chaos well? And it's one of those franchises, and it's part of that market and part of that fan base, that there's just always something, right? But I think this offseason has been a little telling that way, in that there's been Rodgers headlines after Rodgers, but that's just Aaron Rodgers and who he is, and he draws his attention to himself. And I also, like, we do have to talk about, is he the same guy on the field? I mean, he's going to be 41 in December. He's coming off Achilles injury, which we just ignore because this nonsense that he was going to return late in the season. We think that he's healed and he's totally fine. Oh, he almost played in December. He wasn't going to play in December. We don't know what he's like right now in his 40s coming off this Achilles. So as I've talked about the Jets, I'm high on the Jets. I really like them. I like their talent. I think Aaron Rodgers can be good enough to guide the ship to the playoffs, to an AFC East championship, to a playoff win, Fitz. And I'll trust that the talent is going to overcome all this. And when you win, a lot of these back page headlines go away. But you're right. They have a tough start to the season. There are a lot of primetime games. If they start losing, this thing could really get off the rails quickly, because you know how it is with the Jets, with the chaos there. I do agree. The one thing I worry about with my love of the Jets and being high on them going into the season is that early on, all the headlines are about anything but football. And a lot of those will involve Aaron Rodgers. There's just no way around that.
Yeah, that's like such a weird inevitability. And I don't know, man, like I want to stress here, I don't care. So one guy I toured with for years, massive conspiracy theorist, right? And so every time we would get on the bus, like we're getting on the tour bus, we're all sitting in the front lounge of the bus. And like when you live on a tour bus, your bus call is usually like 11 o'clock midnight, right? And so you stay up for a couple hours and you go to bed, you wake up, your bus is in whatever city you're playing the next show. And so you got a couple hours while you're sitting there. And every single time we would all meet at the bus, we'd get on the bus, I'd sit up on the front lounge of the bus. He would start some, like, we never walked on the moon, we never landed on the moon, 9/11 conspiracies, all these things. And I used to say, and I'll say now today, I don't care about conspiracy theories at all, because frankly, if we didn't land on the moon, it doesn't change my Tuesday. My Tuesday is going to be the same. So like, if Aaron Rodgers wants to be super into these weird theories, I don't care. Like, I am happy to be a sheep. I know a lot about music and a lot about sports. Those are the two things that I'm really passionate about. If it's outside of that, I don't really give a damn about it. So I don't care if Aaron Rodgers wants to run for vice president, like if he wants to be put on a ballot. I don't care if Aaron Rodgers feels some kind of way about vaccines. I don't care about any of the way Aaron Rodgers feels about government conspiracies and all the things. I don't give a damn about any of that. I just think it's fair to say, hey, you got an old dude coming off of a bad injury that's going to have to play quarterback in a media market that's absolutely unforgiving, that also doesn't really know how to shut out the noise that comes around him, and he may be capable of dealing with that. But is the rest of the roster? Like, Frank might be able to, like, Frank might go out in public and get himself arrested and be able to answer 5,000 questions about it. That's fine. But if I got to start answering questions about Frank, that might stress me out, right? So, like, it's just the human element of what happens to the Jets locker room here. To me, it's real.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I'll still say that the Jets talent overcomes all this. We're at different sides of this one, though, and it'll be interesting to see how this Jets season plays out. One way or another, they're probably the most fascinating team in the NFL this year.
Don't go get arrested, though, Frank. I don't want to have to do the show by myself the rest of the offseason. It's a long, lonely time doing that. All right, so that was the Jets. The next team, as we start to ascend out of the basement of suck in the AFC from last year into the teams of closer to mediocrity, you, good sir, get the team you know very well because you live right by where all of this action goes down. The Denver Broncos. A big question on your mind for the Broncos.
Yeah, my one big thing for the Broncos is just thinking about how long is this rebuild going to last. And when you think about it, they traded for Sean Payton. They traded for Russell Wilson. They gave up 5 first and second round picks for those two guys. When you think about the construct of any roster in the NFL, a good one anyway, first and second round picks are the foundation of your team. You throw 5 first and second round picks on the last few drafts on the Denver Broncos, all of a sudden I like them a lot more. This is supposed to be the foundation of their team for the next few years, and they're just zeros. I mean, they got obviously nothing out of Russell Wilson and then cut him, and now he's with the Steelers. Peyton's a great coach. I'm not saying that, but roster-wise, they're not really getting anything out of those picks. So I just wonder, is this one of those rare NFL rebuilds that's 5, 6, 7 years? You add on the Russell Wilson cap hit, which is hovering over them for the next couple of years. And it's a really dire experience with the Denver Broncos right now. The one thing they do have is a great coach. Sean Payton is a great coach. I do wonder, is he here long term for this mess, though? If this is a 5 or 6 year rebuild, is Sean Payton still here in 2028? Or is he just like, whatever, I'm going back to Fox. I don't like this anymore. I think these are real questions for the Denver Broncos, whereas most NFL rebuilds, 2 or 3 years. Look at the Houston Texans. They're going to be the team we cite all the time, right? You hit a home run at quarterback, you hit a home run at coach, you could be right back at being a contender in a year or two. I don't see that for the Broncos. I think this is long term. And given how much this fan base has suffered since Peyton Manning retired, that's pretty depressing. I'm not going to lie. Maybe Peyton could dig them out of this. Maybe Bo Nix is awesome right away, and he just carries them to the playoffs in a couple of years. But if there's a long-term rebuild out there in the NFL, I think it might be the Denver Broncos.
Yeah, and so you know me, I love cooking shows. And there was a show, I don't know if you ever saw it, it's called Next Level Chef. Okay, so all these chefs are on a floor, like third floor, second floor, first floor, and they've got their hand against the wall as a thing is dropping down, and it has ingredients on it. So part of what the chef has to do is they have to run up, not only knowing that they're making a dish, it's whatever challenge, they've got to, while this platform is moving, they've got to grab a protein and everything they need to cook their entire dish while this platform is moving. And half the time you'll see a great chef standing there at the end that just didn't get a good grab. And so he's looking around, he's like, I don't have anything to cook with. That's how I feel about Sean Payton right now. Like, Sean Payton's looking around and he's like, man, somehow I didn't get a protein that's good enough, and none of my sides are going to be good enough to make this a competent dish. Like the Broncos, to your point, I do believe they're in the part of this process that rips it back to the studs. But it's important to remember what they gave up before they got to this process, because it makes the rebuild tougher. It's just, there's no two ways around this. Like, they're going to need time. Even if Bo Nix turns out to be the answer at quarterback, they're going to have to surround Bo with more talent. That's going to take 2 or 3 in a beautiful offseason, Frank. In the best offseason you could ever imagine. In my mind, you'd be lucky to get 4 or 5 can't miss, oh my God, starters that you are going to build on through the future. And I'm talking through the draft and free agency combined. If you get 4 or 5 landmark guys in one free agency or one offseason, you've hit a home run. The Broncos, even if they hit a home run with their quarterback, probably still need 16 new starters over the course of the next couple of years.
Yeah,
that's just real.
Their roster is really depleted. I mean, Patrick Surtain and who? I mean, that's kind of who the Broncos are right now. And maybe some of their younger kids develop quickly, but I don't really like the direction of Denver Broncos. Let's move on, because a team I want to hear you talk about, the Las Vegas Raiders, a new era for them. What is the one big thing we should be talking about with the Las Vegas Raiders, your Las Vegas Raiders this season?
So for my beloved Raiders, Allegiant Stadium behind me over here, Max Crosby jersey in the other room. Look, for my beloved Raiders, I think it's easy to say, who's Antonio Pierce as a coach? I thought about that as the one big question. How does the quarterback battle shake out? I thought about that as the one big question. But neither of those were the thing for me, because here's the real of it. The quarterback battle shakes out. I still don't think they've got their quarterback of the future on the roster right now. So that's not going to, and there's nothing this year that's going to make or break AP, I don't think. So to me, when I look at the one thing that will really make or break the Raiders season this year, the question is, can the defense save the team again? Because last year, there wasn't a lot of street cred for this defense coming in, for the defensive coordinator or for the talent other than Max Crosby. By the end of the year, there still wasn't. But there were other guys, Robert Spillane, Jack Jones, on this defense that played really well. And by the end of the year, the defense was the way that the Raiders were winning games. Their ability to sort of emulate the charge and fire and passion with which Max plays was really incredible. They go out, they spend $100 million on Christian Wilkins. They have a lot of questions in that defense, Frank. I'm not going to lie about that. Secondary, I don't know what to expect. What I do know is that the only path for the Raiders to get to mediocrity this year is if their defense is great. I think there are some really good options on the offensive side, but I don't think you got a quarterback that's going to be able to hang with Mahomes and Herbert over and over and over again. That's not real. So you need that defense to be able to minimize Mahomes and Herbert while your offense gets kicked into gear. If the Raiders defense takes a step back, then the Raiders win 4 or 5 games this year. If that defense plays throughout the course of this season the way they did, particularly after AP took over last year, they can win 8 games this year. And I think that's why that's the biggest question.
Yeah, and I think delving further into that, I think our biggest X factor this year is Tyree Wilson. The 7th pick of the 2023 draft was supposed to be this do-everything defensive lineman. He was up and down as a rookie. I don't think he had a big splash, but he's got the talent. We know he's a really good player. Christian Wilkins is going to take up a lot of attention. Obviously, Max Crosby could win Defensive Player of the Year. He's unbelievable. If Tyree Wilson could be kind of that dude, that third star on the defensive line, all of a sudden, they have one of the best defensive lines in football. And that's a good place to start. If you're going to have if you're a kind of a mediocre roster that has one strength, having a great defensive line is the way to go. And if Tyree Wilson is that dude, they could have a great defensive line. Wilkins, Crosby, Wilson, if he plays up to his draft status, could be very good and keep them in a lot of games and keep them competitive. And who knows, like Gardner Minshew, we'll talk about the Colts in a second. Gardner Minshew almost had the Colts in the playoffs last year. I don't know that the Raiders are set up as well as the Colts were last year, but he could be that guy to kind of be as good of a bridge quarterback as you could ever find. So I agree with you. If the Raiders are going to be in playoff contention, it's going to be because of their defense. And more specifically, I think it's going to be because their defensive line ended up being one of the best in football.
I'll give you one other name quickly before we move past my beloved Raiders, but Malcolm Kuntz, who got a lot of rotational play instead of Tyree at the end of the last year, really blew up. And here's the advantage that Kuntz and Tyree are both going to have. There is not a single team that's going to sit there and say, you know what? We got to take away Tyree Wilson this week. Nope. All that effort's going to Max and to Christian Wilkins, right? When you put all that in, all Kuntz and Tyree are going to have to do is win one-on-one matchups. Really, I agree with you. This defensive line could be one of the best in the league. That's what I'm banking on. All right, we're just getting rolling with the AFC. We'll get through the rest of the best of the AFC and our burning questions when we come back. We're back, Frank, and you were just mentioning Gardner Minshew. It leads us to the next team as we go through this list, the Colts. And I'm really curious what you think of this because I have lots of Colts thoughts. I want to let you go first with your question on Indy.
Yeah, and my one big thing for the Colts is, are we underrating them coming into the season? Because as this offseason has gone along and I've thought about the Colts and studied the Colts and watched the film and all this kind of stuff, I really like this team. And I'll tell you why. I hate overreacting to single events, especially things that could go 50-50. How do we feel about the Colts if they win in Week 18 last year and make the playoffs? If we remember, they had this showdown against the Houston Texans. It was in Indianapolis. If you win, you're in the playoffs. If you lose, you're out. The Colts lost, and we just forgot about them immediately. Whereas the Texans, they go on, they win a playoff game, and what happened? All of a sudden, we're all in love with the Houston Texans because of that extra exposure, because they had the big win in Week 18. They won the playoff game, and now we're over the moon. We think C.J. Stroud's winning MVP. We think that team's a Super Bowl contender. What if the Colts would have won that game in Week 18? Like, I think we would just be giving them a lot more respect, and we've completely forgotten about them because they had a bad game in Week 18 against the Texans. I think this team, if Anthony Richardson can stay healthy, and that's a huge if, I get that. You look at the rest of that roster, and they're set up really, really well. They almost made the playoffs last year with Gardner Minshew, with a less than ideal quarterback situation, one game away, one win away from that. And I think they're underrated because they didn't win that game. We didn't see them in the playoffs beating the Browns like C.J. Stroud and the Texans did. I think this Colts team is really, really strong. And while we all over the moon over the Texans, and rightfully so, C.J. Stroud's awesome, DeMeco Ryans is awesome, I think we're forgetting about the Colts and how close they were to the playoffs and how good they might be in 2024.
Especially looking at the job Shane Steichen did as a head coach, thinking about losing your starting quarterback early in the season and keeping a team that had no expectations afloat. The hardest part for me is the knock on Anthony Richardson coming out of college is there was some good tape, some bad tape, but very little tape. He needs reps. He didn't get a lot of those. So I am curious to see. I still think that there's going to be this acclimation process. Anthony Richardson's got to see more football. He's just got to play more. So the injury sort of makes this an incomplete for me, and that's why I think this is interesting. I'm not sure there's a harder division to figure out the good and the bad than the AFC South, because we talked about it. Like the Titans to me are a bit of an incomplete. The Colts to me, not knowing what to expect from Anthony Richardson this year, are a bit of an incomplete. Like I think they're hard teams to figure out. I want the Colts to be great because it was one of the best stories in the league last year. But I just don't know that I right now can trust Anthony Richardson, not just to be healthy, but to play great football for the entirety of the season. It's just, we haven't seen enough football yet from the starting quarterback that was a developmental prospect when he was picked. That's the hardest part for me, Frank.
Completely fair. I mean, I will just say that the ceiling is so tantalizing, though. I mean, the games he did play last year, he was excellent. Our colleague, Dalton Del Don, over on the fantasy side, has Anthony Richardson as his number one quarterback coming into the season. I get fantasy's not reality, right? But that just does speak to what this guy can be if he stays healthy. Hey, you're right. There's a downside here too. We haven't seen him play much. I mean, it just in the NFL or college, which is troubling. But he was so exciting in those games he played that if you just prorate this out and say, if he could just stay healthy, what can he do with Jonathan Taylor, Michael Pittman, Josh Downs, Mitchell? They're really, really good rookie, pretty good offensive line, a defense that kept them in a lot of games. This Colts team is pretty good, and I'm very excited to check them out. Let's move ahead to the Jacksonville Jaguars because we all know that there's only one talking point with the Jacksonville Jaguars now. We've both been pretty hard on Trevor Lawrence, but what is your big thing with the Jacksonville Jaguars coming into the season?
I remember the day he was drafted. I was hosting a draft show for ESPN at the time. And the first thing I said about Trevor Lawrence is that the Jags will fail Trevor Lawrence before Trevor Lawrence will fail the Jags. And then, what do you know? They tried. Like Urban Meyer was such a disaster. And then Doug Peterson comes in and we get what we think is competent coaching and you start to see this ascension, but it just hasn't broken through. And now that I do think there's a real question. They are treating their roster construction like Trevor Lawrence has already answered every question and he is a riser, right? Like I've talked so much about how quarterbacks have the seesaw. In the beginning, they need help. And then when they get paid, they're supposed to be at a level where they are the help, right? You can put things around them and they make them better. They are treating Trevor Lawrence like he's already proven at the NFL level he is that. I don't know that that's the case. I mean, I don't necessarily love their weapons. I don't necessarily love their offensive. I think Trevor Lawrence is going to be asked to do a ton of heavy lifting. This is one of those rare situations. And Frank, I don't know that we see it very often. It's rare that you see a coach that the world seems to respect and a quarterback that the world seems to respect aligned on one team that the world doesn't respect. And that says everything about the rest of the roster construction for Jacksonville, because I think, frankly, it's a problem. The one big question is Trevor Lawrence, and I don't think the Jags have done anything to help answer that question.
I agree with you. And I think Trevor's brought some of it on himself. He misses throws and he makes mistakes. But there are a legion of people out there on social media, they're not hard to find, who basically will dunk on you if you rip Trevor Lawrence and say, what have the Jaguars done for him? And when you take a step back and look at it, they're not wrong. I mean, this, again, you brought up some of the issues here. Who's their number one receiver? It could be Brian Thomas, their first round pick, but we don't know that yet. He's a first round rookie. They hit and miss all the time. Guys like Gabriel Davis, Christian Kirk just strike me as pretty good number twos, but not a number one. Their offensive line isn't great. Their defense isn't the type of defense that could just say, hey, Trevor, we don't need 31 points today. We got this. Not yet. I mean, maybe they're getting there. Trevon Walker, he's taking steps forward, but this defense as a whole isn't great. Nothing on this team is great. So they need Trevor Lawrence to be great. And it's hard for him because I don't know that he's there yet. And I don't know that he has a cast around him either. So it's this total chicken and egg thing, especially with, having to pay Trevor Lawrence because he's at that point in his rookie deal where, is Trevor Lawrence great and we're failing him, or is Trevor Lawrence not as great as we thought and none of this is going to help him? I don't know that the Jaguars have that answer yet. And I think I don't know that they're going to get those answers this season. It's a really fascinating year coming up for the Jaguars, just in terms of development, where they're going with everything. I don't think that they've done right by Trevor Lawrence yet, but yet Trevor Lawrence himself hasn't been the great, Andrew Luck, John Elway, Joe Namath type of prospect we expected either.
Yeah, he's got to break through this year. And if he doesn't, things get really complicated for the Jags. So, and you're right, he's a quarterback that everybody's been wanting to make excuses for. Speaking of quarterbacks, Cincinnati Bengals get theirs back. So we all presume that Burrow means Super Bowl opportunities for the Bengals. They are my way too early AFC Super Bowl pick, in fact. So, Frank, I will let you, sir, tell me what the one big question is for Cincinnati.
Yeah, the one big thing for me with the Bengals in studying them this offseason is that their offense really wasn't the problem last year. Maybe early in the season, I get that. But we forget Jake Browning played some pretty good football. And that's a testament to that coaching staff and whatnot. But we just, sit here and assume, oh, Joe Burrow's back. They're right back to being Super Bowl contenders when it wasn't really the offense holding them back last year. It was the defense. That defense took a massive step back last year. They were 23rd in DVOA in terms of yards per play allowed, 32nd in the NFL in yards per pass allowed, tied for 29th in the NFL in yards per rush allowed. We all praise their coordinator, Lou Anarumo, for the last couple of years when they were Super Bowl contenders, and then he didn't have any answers last year. I think this is a big prove-it year for the defense. And we all have questions about Joe Burrow and his wrist and all that kind of stuff. But I think the defense is what's going to make or break them. Can they get back to where they were in 2021, 2022, and they were very, very good, top 10 even. Last year, they plummeted a little bit. Do you just get that back? I mean, the offseason wasn't great for them personnel-wise. It's not like they added a ton to the defense. They concentrated on the offensive line in the first round of the draft. They lose DJ Reader in free agency. He was a big-time run stopper for them. They added some pieces, but I just have questions about the defense more than the offense, and I don't think we're talking about that enough because we all just think that Joe Burrow's going to save them.
No, and you're right. And by the way, I will throw myself on the sword of that of just I am blinded by the offensive possibilities for Burrow with this offense and what it should mean for the Bengals. But you're right, the defense has been a problem. We'll stick in the same division and go to the Pittsburgh Steelers. And I guess if I have one, look, Steelers fans have been just killing me on Twitter for saying this. But if I have one big question is can the Steelers stay out of the basement? I right now, to me, it's all, can Tomlin have the winning season? Look, if you just look at the roster as a whole, I think the Ravens are a better roster with a much better quarterback. We all know that. The Browns, as you know, I've been very high on the Browns. I continue to be high on the Browns. I think the Browns are a better roster, and even Deshaun Watson, better quarterback than the Steelers have in their room. The Bengals, by far, have a better quarterback. You're right, they have some questions on defense, but I think they have a far more talented offense. Particularly, I think the Bengals are a better team. If we were playing on Madden, the least appealing team to me in their own division is the Pittsburgh Steelers. So, like, in my mind, we just sit here every year and we say, well, Tomlin has a winning season. We all know that. Okay, in this division, today looks like the toughest division in all the NFL. Can the Steelers not be in last place? I don't see how. And part of it is that I don't believe in Russ, and I don't believe in Justin Fields coming in midway through the season and suddenly fixing this. Like, Justin Fields has to win the job in the preseason for me to feel like, yes, now they're pushing towards him, towards a way that they can have a starting quarterback that they can rely on all year. But they don't right now. And even if Justin Fields does start, I would argue, as much as I've been hard on Deshaun on this show, they have the fourth best quarterback solution. So, fourth best quarterback, this team's going to finish in last place.
Yeah, it's honestly hard to argue. And honestly, it says something about Mike Tomlin's greatness that we don't just automatically say, yeah, the Steelers are going to be terrible. Because there's something in the back of our minds that's saying, maybe Tomlin can pull this off and they don't finish in last place. Because he does it every year. But at some point, I just don't know how this talent on the roster competes with those other three teams in the division, as you said. Unless there's injuries elsewhere, I don't see how the Steelers get there unless Russ is rejuvenated or, like you said, Justin Fields wins the job early and just kind of takes off. But I think we both have questions about those quarterbacks. We both have questions about the receivers now, too. It's not as deep as it used to be. They're relying a lot on George Pickens, who isn't the most reliable guy in the world. Their defense is still great as long as TJ's healthy, but TJ Watt. But how long is, how long can he play at this elite level? Maybe for years and years. I don't know. But it's going to have to just be this old school approach, smash mouth with both of their running backs, the defense carrying them. Maybe they get some good quarterback play. Maybe Tomlin just figures out a way, but I'm kind of with you. When you look at this division, if you're having an honest assessment, how do you not pick this team for last place? I just think that they would have to have a lot of really fortunate things happen through the course of the year to finish above any of the other three teams that we're talking about in the AFC North.
Real quick, what do you think the best case scenario is at the quarterback position for the Steelers?
I've always thought it's Justin Fields. I mean, when you think about Russ, let's just talk about Russ real quick. Let's say Russ has a really good season. It looks like Seattle Russ again. Are you giving him a massive extension at age 37 going into 2025? Like, he's on a one-year deal. Like, it's hard for me to imagine that the Steelers, and when we're talking about this in a few months, we're going to be like, oh yeah, the Steelers signed him to a 4-year, $200 million extension or whatever it would be. That doesn't make any sense to me. So I think our best case scenario from now until the end of the season is Justin Fields wins that job early, comes around as a passer. Those are the questions, right? We all know his athleticism, and he's shown flashes. He's had some good games. He's not a zero as a passer. If he develops that, and by the end of the year they feel good about Justin Fields going forward, I think that's our best case. But I think there's a long way to go before we can feel like, oh yes, Justin Fields is the quarterback of the future for the Pittsburgh Steelers.
I totally agree. Speaking of quarterbacks and controversies always around them, Miami Dolphins, always a talking point with Tua, but what is your big talking point for the Dolphins, Frank?
Yeah, my one big thing for the Dolphins is something we talked about all last season, and I'm going to dredge it up, Dolphins fans. I'm sorry. But are they paper tigers? We talked all last season about this team doesn't have any quality wins. Like they're beating bad teams and they're beating the heck out of bad teams. And that's a sign of being a good team as well. But when it came to the quality teams on their schedule, they lost most of them. The only big win they had last year, week 16 at home. They beat the Dallas Cowboys on a last-second field goal, beat them by 2 points. A win is a win, I get that, but we're talking about basically a coin flip outcome. That's their only good win they had all season. When you go back and look at who they beat, it was the Denver Broncos of the world. It was a beat-up New York Jets team that didn't have a quarterback. And then that really came back to bite them late in the season when they got blown out by the Ravens. They lose to the Bills in an AFC East championship game. They lose to the Kansas City Chiefs in the playoffs. So we come into this year with the Dolphins coming off a really nice season, and you like their talent and Tyreek and Tua and the running backs, and Mike McDaniel's a really good coach. But the question in the back of my mind is, are we just overrating them now because of all the wins they had last year? Because most of those wins came against bad teams. I need to see them prove they can beat good teams on a regular basis before I put them ahead of the Bills or even the Jets for me with a healthy Aaron Rodgers. I'm down on the Dolphins a little bit just because I think they're more unproven than you would think from a team that just made the playoffs.
Look, I'll credit my buddy Mike Golick Jr., who last year at the end of the season asked this question to our friend group. If they hadn't put 70 up on the Broncos, would we still give them the same level of street cred? I think the answer to that is no. In fact, if you look, I pulled up their results last year, and if you look at who they scored a bunch of points on, 70 points on the Broncos. Yeah, that's an outlier. 42 on Carolina, who we all know is the worst team in the league. 31 against New England, who we know was one of the worst teams in the league. 34 against the Jets later when they were a shell of themselves. 45 against a bad Commanders team that was in the middle of change, right? When you look at some of the better teams, 14 against Buffalo, 19 against the Ravens, 14 against Kansas City, 17 against the Eagles. Even the offensive production of the Dolphins, not just the wins, the offensive production against the Dolphins last year was like two totally different conversations. How are they against bad teams? How are they against good teams? In my mind, when you look at what you have to see from them, we still need to see sustained greatness against great teams. That's why, as much as everybody wants to anoint the Dolphins or the Jets as the future winner of the AFC East, I still believe in the Bills because I'm not sure if the Dolphins are going to be able to beat quality football teams or put points up against quality football teams. And I told you about the Jets earlier. So it's interesting to me that the Dolphins aren't just about the wins. Their offensive production is a bit of a paper tiger sometimes. So that's why I know that the Bills game was in the cold, and everybody will talk about those sort of elements. But that's just the way it goes, right? That's just the way life goes with this situation. And actually, the January loss was at home. They lost 21-14 to Buffalo. How are you only putting 14 points up when your offense is supposed to be that good and there was that much on the line?
Yeah, it's just one of those, who have you played? Who have you beat? And the Dolphins' answer to that is not pretty from last year. We'll see. I mean, they have a chance to overcome that this year. Now, I'm going to move on to the Browns because I do think we agree in general on how good the Browns can be, but we have one big disagreement on this team. So take it away. Cleveland Browns, what's your one big thing?
Does Deshaun Watson have the yips? Is he a lost cause? Is it done? And I think I err towards the side of yes, it's done. Now, all he has to do is be as good as Flacco was, and they'll win football games. I love their coaching. I love their roster. I think the Browns are Super Bowl caliber. I don't think their quarterback is. So this year, because they have no choice, they will again run it back with Deshaun Watson. But at some point, even though it costs too much money, they're going to have to figure out what the future at the position looks like. And I don't know if that means drafting somebody and just hoping that you can basically get through that rookie deal while you're overpaying Deshaun at the end of this. But this contract looks like arguably the worst ever given out in any sport at this point, and the quarterback is washed. So the hardest part, if I even trust Deshaun Watson to have mediocre quarterback play this year, I would be picking the Browns for the Super Bowl. I can't trust that, so I can't do that.
Yeah, and I do have the light on still for Deshaun Watson being a good quarterback. Maybe I'm just talking myself into that. And by the way, the caveats we all got to say, I'm not vouching for him as a human being or anything like that. I'm just talking about him as a quarterback. A little more than 24 months ago, when he got that contract, we thought it was a lot. We thought the trade was a lot, but it wasn't crazy because Deshaun Watson was in that level of he is an elite quarterback. He's a top 5 quarterback. He was that dude with the Texans. Now, he just hasn't played up to that level, right, with the Browns, for sure. But you could tell yourself a story, and trust me, Fitz, I have, that 2022, he has the really long suspension, and he's coming onto a new team, new coaching staff late in the year. There was no way he was going to succeed that year. Last year, no, he wasn't great, but they were 5-1 in his starts. And I hate quarterback wins as a stat, but I think they can win with him. And I think that if you look back at that Baltimore game, the one where he got hurt, he was playing really good ball there. I think he was just starting to get his confidence back maybe a little bit. Now, it's been a long time since we've seen Deshaun Watson play elite football. It has been. I can't account for that. There's kind of a blind hope that he's just going to show up this year and be the Deshaun Watson I remember from early in his career, even back to Clemson when he was obviously a great quarterback. But I do believe that Deshaun Watson can be a plus quarterback for the Browns. He might never be that top 5, top 7 type of guy he was. He might never be the guy who deserves that $230 million fully guaranteed contract that kind of put the NFL on its head. But I do think he could be good. I think he'd be good enough for the Cleveland Browns to be a legit Super Bowl contender this year. Yes, it's been a long time, but I still hold out kind of that thought in my head that this dude is not that old and it's not that crazy to think he could be a really, really good quarterback again.
You know who doesn't have to worry about Deshaun anymore? The Houston Texans. They're next up on the list, Frank. All right, so give me your, since they don't have to answer any questions about Deshaun, what is your one big thing for Houston?
Yeah, my one big thing for the Houston Texans is kind of which Stephon Diggs are we going to get? Everybody was really, really fired up for that trade, and I get it. The Houston Texans, you look and you're like, wow, you had Stephon Diggs of this offense that was so good with C.J. Stroud last year. But I think we have to take a step back and ask some questions about Stephon Diggs. He had no 100-yard games from week 6 on last year, and that's with one of the greatest quarterbacks on the planet throwing under the ball, Josh Allen. He didn't have any touchdowns in his last 7 games last year. When the season was on the line against the Kansas City Chiefs in the playoffs, he had 21 yards, and they lost. I just don't know, is Diggs going to be happy if Nico Collins is the number 1 guy? Does he mesh right away with this team? Has he lost a step, and we just started to see it at the end of last year? I mean, that worries me when a guy his age basically has 2/3 of a season that's just not good, that maybe he's just lost it. Guys lose it in the NFL pretty fast. I think if Diggs is happy, if he's motivated from being traded, we've seen that Stephon Diggs before, and he just meshes really well and doesn't really care if Tank Dell's getting the ball this game and Nico's getting the ball this game, and he just ends up being a great teammate and a great receiver for the Texans, that could happen for sure. We could also see a scenario where Diggs isn't quite the player he was. He's not happy. He rocks the boat, upsets our chemistry a little bit. I think we haven't accounted for that enough.
Yeah, by the way, you say that could happen. I could go upstairs after this and suddenly be sitting there with Santa Claus and the Tooth Fairy slow dancing in my living room. Like the thought of Stephon Diggs in a year where he's got money on the line, being content being arguably the 3rd option at times for the Texans, that feels impossible to me. So I think what you hit on at the end is the most important thing the Texans are going to have to deal with. When Diggs isn't happy, who's dealing with that and how? Right? Because one thing that we've heard so much from guys that played the game is that every leader is different in a locker room. Sometimes you got to have a dog that's willing to stand up and say, hey, it's not going to work that way here. Is that what we're now asking C.J. Stroud in his 2nd year to do? Suddenly you're asking C.J. Stroud in his 2nd year in the NFL to do what the last 2 landmark quarterbacks that had tremendous success with Stephon Diggs weren't capable of doing, standing up to the temper tantrums? I like that just feels like that's a lot to me. And everything got so good so fast for the Texans. I do think the distraction element is a little undercovered. You got a group of guys that obviously gel together, click together from the staff to the players, Frank. So I think putting this weird little piece in is definitely messing with the mojo. Like you are putting a little bit into this dish that could take the whole thing and ruin it. So I think that is, especially in a contract year, because if he's not getting the ball, he ain't getting paid, and we know he wants to get paid.
Yeah, I think you make a great point with the Stroud part of this is if this does go off the rails a little bit early in the season, midseason, whenever it is, we love CJ Stroud. I love CJ Stroud. I know you do too. Is he capable in his 2nd year of kind of taking over that situation and saying, no, that's not how we do it here? I don't know. We'll see. But he hasn't been tested like that. And that's another distraction for a young quarterback. You could see this going off the rails. That's all I'm saying. I'm not saying it will. Stephon Diggs could put up 1,500 yards a season. It would not surprise me. It'd also not surprise me if we're a few months into the season talking about, wow, this trade wasn't as great as everybody thought it was, because it just kind of upset a little bit of the apple cart with the Texans, who had such a good thing going. And now a team that always has some good things going. The Kansas City Chiefs, I mean, they're the story of this season. They're chasing this 3-peat, and no team's ever won 3 Super Bowls in a row. What's your one bit? Do you have any concerns about the Chiefs? What's your question with the Chiefs coming into the season?
My one big thing with the Kansas City Chiefs is none of it matters. Like, this is what we're going to do. We're going to look at Rashee Rice. We're going to look at Butker. We're going to look at distractions. We're going to look at deficiencies in the roster, and none of it matters. If you couldn't catch the Chiefs last year, how are you going to catch them? Like, I mean, realistically, when you have the best quarterback in the game and the best head coach in the game, and there's a synergy between the two of them, I'm not talking about the edge of who gets credit for what. Like, the whole New England edge that seemed to break apart Brady and Belichick has not yet seeped into Kansas City, and I don't think it ever will, because personality-wise, these two guys are like father-son. There's a dynamic between Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes that is unlike any we usually see with success at this level. And when you have a guy that can absolutely beat you at every step of the game, and you have a guy that has beaten you without the best weapons around him, without the best offensive line around him, like when you have that guy and you have the smartest offensive coach in the league, one of the best coaches of all time, now clearly the best coach in the NFL, you have them together. The only hope the rest of the NFL has, and this is not hope, the only chance the rest has is that somebody gets injured, that somebody has the flu, that something changes something. You got to get lucky and catch the Chiefs on a bad day. That's the only way you beat. I have no questions. As long as Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes are together in this era, this year, next year, the year after, I have zero questions. There is no big thing that needs to be answered for Kansas City.
You might be right. It's hard to argue. I mean, last year was not a great season for the Chiefs. It was good, and obviously it ended great. But when you look for, Patrick Mahomes yelling at the refs and the lack of this and lack of that, you look and yes, they have not had a great offseason. There have been a lot of headlines that you really don't want in your house. It's not ideal, but you're right. Does it matter? Like they won a Super Bowl last year with not the best version of themselves.
They went to Buffalo and won. They went to Buffalo and won in the
went
worst.
To Baltimore and won.
I mean, they went into everybody else's house and they're like, I mean, your Thanksgiving's good, but mine's better. Like they did it. They do the damn thing.
Yeah, it is. It's astonishing. It's remarkable. It's hard. What questions are we going to sit here and nitpick about the Chiefs? Like, oh, Travis Kelce's getting older. Who cares? He was a stud in the playoffs. We think he's just going to fall off a cliff from what we saw in the postseason last year? Probably not. Like, they lost L'Jarius Sneed. Oh, well, they'll probably replace him because this is just what the Chiefs do. That's the mode they're in right now. This is a true dynasty. And you're right. There just isn't much to worry about with the Kansas City Chiefs. It's just a matter of some team, like you say, catch them on a bad day in January. And at this point, how are you going to bet on that? It's hard because the Chiefs they're a train right now, and they're not going to be any worse than they were last year.
Think we get a three-peat?
I have to take the field. If you're saying Chiefs versus a field, I have to take the field, but it's scary, man. It's what are you doing? You're just getting in front of a train at some point. Like, why? Like, Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid are the best of this generation, and I'll take the field just because I have to take the field based on percentages or whatnot. But nah, you take them. I mean, you take them over the field right now.
Yeah, no. Chiefs versus the field, the smart bet's the field. If I'm putting money on one team right now to win the Super Bowl, it would be the Kansas City Chiefs. I don't see anybody that's better. Now, the next team we're going to talk about is the one team that I keep thinking is the hope, but they can't break through. Buffalo Bills, I said last year on this show with you, it's like going into the playoffs, man, you got them at home. You got them when the Kansas City's a shell of themselves, when they haven't really come into their identity. You got to win this game. They did not, good sir. So what is your one big thing for the Buffalo Bills?
My one big thing for the Bills is just, we written them off too soon. You, Fitz, you talked about this on one of our previous podcasts, and it really kind of opened my mind to really maybe underrating what the Buffalo Bills can be this season. You look back at last season, and they had that weird first 2/3 of the year where they were losing to teams like the Broncos, and it was like they're not going to make the playoffs. They were really unlucky to be in that spot. And then they played up to their talent level the rest of the regular season. Won the AFC East, obviously, made the playoffs. And like you said, we thought that they were going to get over that hump. They get the Chiefs at home. They're going to beat them. The Chiefs are down a little bit. And they lose that game. I don't like overreacting to the single things that could happen. Tyler Bass makes that field goal. You tie that game up, you might win that game. We're having a completely different conversation about the Buffalo Bills. Did it hurt to lose Stephon Diggs? Absolutely. Do I have many, many questions about their cast around Josh Allen? No doubt about it. But we kind of forget how good this Bills team was last year. They were third in DVOA. They played up to that level up until the Chiefs game for the last part of that season when they made their playoff push. I think, me included, talking about the Jets all offseason, right? Me included, might have just been writing them off a little bit. We all think like, the Bills aren't contenders anymore. I don't know, man. They're still a really good team with a great quarterback. At some point, maybe they break through. The one big thing for me is just, Are we writing the Bills off too early? I know you haven't, and I'm starting to come around to your line of thinking here.
Yeah, and I think there's two separate conversations. The Bills and the Cowboys, I would say the same thing. There's two separate conversations. Success and Super Bowls are very different. I think the Bills are positioned to be successful every year right now. Just like I said with Kansas City, Josh Allen puts them in that area. They're going to be successful. I would not be surprised at all to see the Bills competing for home field advantage in the playoffs at all. Does that mean that they're going to figure out how to get through Kansas City? No, just like when we talk about the NFC in a couple of days. Like, I think the Cowboys are going to be in the running for the first overall seed, the home field advantage in the NFC. Does that mean that I think Dak's going to perform in the playoffs? I don't know. Like, that's the problem, is that we look at success in the bubble of we got to win the Super Bowl. Well, there's a whole season that leads up to that. I think the Bills are going to be very good this season. I think you're right about that. That means only one team left in the AFC, and that would be the Baltimore Ravens. And this is what's interesting to me, is just Derrick Henry. What impact does Derrick Henry make? Because you can talk about Derrick Henry's his stats last year. I want to point out that the Titans' offensive line was dreadful. Like, I'm pretty sure super skinny Taylor Lewan with bad knees could go in and would have been better than any of the five guys on the starting five for the Titans last year on their offensive line. They don't have or didn't have answers on the offensive line, right? At all. So whatever Derrick Henry did, he did his He-Man. Nobody was scared of their quarterback. Nobody was scared of their offensive line. They knew to stop Derrick Henry, which has been the way. And, every year I think about the workload that's been asked of Derrick Henry. When you see the way he trains, you know how he can play. He's going to be huge for adding an element you can depend on if you're the Ravens in the running game. They haven't had that. They've had good running backs who can't stay healthy. Henry can stay healthy. Henry can bolster their entire running attack. I think he can bring more balance even to the offense. He can bring more threat to the offense. I think Derrick Henry's a huge difference maker for Lamar.
Yeah, I do too. And I keep thinking about the AFC Championship game. We talked about it that night on Zero Blitz. We've talked about it in the offseason since. They gave their running back 6 carries in what was a competitive game throughout. Like, the Ravens were never getting blown out in that game, and they just never handed the ball off. That doesn't happen if you have Derrick Henry. Like, you're going to say, well, you know what? Yeah, we're behind 10 points right now, but we're still feeding Derrick Henry because he's one of the great running backs of this generation. And I think that Derrick Henry, there is a question about his workload and when he's going to hit the wall. And it might be this year. We don't know. We've seen guys change teams late in their career, and all of a sudden it's like, whoa, he's washed. He's done. I don't think that way about Derrick Henry necessarily, because Lamar takes so much pressure off of him. Derrick Henry's going to be like, what? This is a rushing lane? I haven't seen this in years. What? This is a 7-man box? What is going on here? That happens when you have the MVP of the league, a quarterback who could also run the ball, and you have to account for as a defense, as a runner. So I think Derrick Henry is going to be a little rejuvenated, not to be the absolute focal point of an offense. And I think he's going to complement him so well. And I think what's happened in some of these playoff losses, not trying to play amateur psychologist, but I think Lamar puts all the pressure on himself. You could just see it in some of his body language with the mistakes he's made. And that's not to excuse him for the mistakes he's made. He has come up short in big games, but how much help has he really had? Again, 6 running back carries last year because they didn't trust that running game, obviously. I think being able to hand the ball to Derrick Henry over and over and over again in a playoff game against a team like the Chiefs or the Bills, whoever they're going to face, I think that takes a lot off Lamar Jackson's shoulders. And maybe Derrick Henry does get them over the hump. This is the first time we've really seen a superstar running back with Lamar. Mark Ingram had a really good late push in his career with Lamar, but I think Derrick Henry is a different breed. This guy's a Hall of Famer, and I do think that he's going to help the Baltimore Ravens. Now, whether that means a Super Bowl for them or not, I don't know, but I think that the offense looks completely different, and I think Lamar is going to be able to have a little bit of a sigh of relief in some of those playoff games and say, I don't need to do everything in this game. Derrick Henry can carry the ball 25 times for 100 yards, and that takes a lot of pressure off me. And maybe if they had Derrick Henry last year, if they would have been able to pull off that trade midseason to get him, I don't know necessarily that they lose the AFC Championship game to the Chiefs. That's how much of a difference he can be.
I agree, and I challenge any coach to have the you-know-whats to look at Henry and be like, yeah, we're only going to give you the ball 6 times in this key important playoff game. Now, that's not going to happen. And he joins an offense that has weapons at every level. I mean, their tight end room has turned out to be very good. Their wide receivers have turned out to be very good. Lamar is obviously an MVP. So I think it's incredible. Okay, that's the AFC. We're going to break down the NFC team by team the same way on Thursday. In the meantime, tomorrow, Nate Tice joins Charles McDonald on the exempt list on this here feed. You can check it out. Don't forget, we'll be back Thursday. Shout out to Joe, stepping in and producing behind the scenes. So everything that sounds smart is all because of Joe. Everything that sounds dumb is because, well, frankly, Frank and I are just, mailing it. No, I kid. Joe does all the good work. He makes sure that he sounds smart. Be sure you rate, subscribe, review, tell your friends, family, enemies, tell everybody to hang out with us all the time. We will be back Thursday. So, pop your popcorn, get your iced tea ready, get ready for more fun as we'll break down the burning questions that we have across the NFC next time. For Frank Schwab, I'm Jason Fitz. Thanks for hanging out on Zero Blitz.